house is a zone of activity. The eighth is the metamorphic processes in this lifetime. You might think of the eighth as the chrysalis of the chart, and the eighth house cusp as the lens through which you watch those transformations. Transits through the eighth bring circumstances that renew and revitalize. Planets in the eighth are dedicated to regeneration. By that, I mean growing something back that life has bitten off or changing into something new. Some transformations are grueling. They happen over time and under enormous pressure. They're dramatic and deep. The eighth is famous for those, but the eighth oversees simpler transformations as well, such as the cross pollination that changes what grows in a field. A breeze and a few spores landing in the right spot can change what's blooming within you. Simple transformations are probably the most common, but transformation isn't all we find in the eighth. This is the house of other people's money, unearned income, such as a trust. It's the home of all forms of inheritances. It's also where you find taxes, debt, loss, sex, merging, and death. The eighth is the second water house. It's the home of Scorpio in the natural zodiac, and it's ruled by Pluto, god of the dead. Any water house is associated with the unconscious, a part of the psyche we know is there, but lurks under the surface. The unconscious is a strange landscape where we're propelled by raw emotion that we don't know about and agendas of which we're often unaware. Those hidden parts of the psyche are integral to bringing change. They bring events that really seem like they're happening on the outside and coming from the fates. This house is full of riddles about how much control we actually have over what we encounter in our lives. Is it random, or do we make it? The eighth is associated with the idea that there are two decision makers within you. One is the ego, and the other is the soul. Scorpio and the eighth house are linked to the harrowing experiences that bring the deep changes of which the soul is in charge. The eighth oversees the events that shatter our lives too, such as an unexpected death or other losses, the events that we think we'll never be able to adapt to, not in a million years. In the eighth, you find all the undercurrents that flow under the surface when people interact. You're not sure what she says to make it happen exactly, but you always feel bad when you get off the phone with your mother, even though you're energetic to begin with when she calls. You really thought this person was different, but they ended up being a carbon copy of all your past friends who disappointed you. The eighth holds all the secret machinery that makes you repeat the same patterns. And that's why this house is associated with inheritance. These include the financial kind, but also what's passed down on an emotional and mental level. It's a portal for psychic forces. Your father's secret molestation by his own father that caused him to never touch you is an inheritance. Your mother's unresolved feelings of resentment that she gave up her dreams for the family is an inheritance. You've always struggled with an urge to suicide, only to find out that your mother did too, and so did her mother. That's an inheritance. This is the house where you don't know on a conscious level, but somehow through osmosis, you do know. It's just that planets in the eighth have a way of staying quiet. I think there's some grief that surrounds this segment of the chart. It holds the primal emotions, it holds rage and remorse over what's been lost. I think of the eighth less as a house and more as a closet. Grief bangs on the closet door. It oozes out underneath, trying to get some light and transform. And what happens with transits to the eighth is that those secrets you're trying to keep hidden somehow bubble up. That scandal comes to the surface, the family secret is revealed, or you're confronted by a truth about yourself that's almost unbearable. The eighth is also where desire percolates. Don't forget how powerful desire is. When you don't know what you want, that feels pretty impotent. But when you know exactly what you want, there's not much stopping you from going after it, fighting for it, perhaps possessing it. Desire is a raw and primal power in this powerhouse. Another feature here is intimate relationships and merging. The house of merging comes after the house of marriage because after the legal contract is signed in the seventh, two lives begin to become one. A couple moves into a space that used to house just one person, and they share a bed where they used to sleep alone. Now it's hard to tell who's who and what's what. You have to take the other person into account when you make any significant decisions. You've got both of your debts, both of your skills, both of your crises, and both of your wealth. When you merge, there are certain boundaries that go away, and that's how intimate relationships are meant to be. You aren't supposed to know where one person ends and the other begins. But the most permanent kind of merging goes on in the biological world when two people merge their genes and create a new life. That's a merging that can never be divided again. Now we've arrived at two other associations with the eighth, sex and death. There was a time when sex and procreation were all wrapped up in death. Childbirth was the most dangerous thing a woman could do. And through the Middle Ages, it was customary to make a will before the labor pains began. So, in the absence of reliable birth control, having sex could actually end up killing you. However, the association of this house with death goes beyond physical death. It's linked to urgent situations too, those events that trigger the primal brain, the fight or flight response. Emotional and spiritual deaths are also here. In order to transform yourself, the old you has to pass away. The eighth is in charge of that process, molting, leaving a skin behind, dying and rising. Any psychological, spiritual, or emotional death can be painful, so the eighth is generally considered a serious house, your own personal underworld. The role of every house is to offer a special environment where planets can assist the sun's actualization. When it comes to the eighth, we get a private inner space where planets can step out of the shadows and the sun can shine more brightly. When you're on the edge of death, you feel very alive. And a more colorful perception of life is the ultimate goal of the house of death. I'm sometimes asked if transits to the eighth can give an idea of when a person's physical death will occur. Most astrologers don't do that sort of thing anymore, but for centuries, it was a simpler task because people died all the time. They died young, and they died of things we can easily treat today. However, it's easy when looking at transits to the eighth to see that a critical experience is coming or a symbolic death is on the way. Modern astrology is more a psychological tool and less a predictive device. So I think it's right to widen the possibilities when it comes to the meaning of death in the eighth house. Thank you for watching Secrets from an Astrologer's Desk, the eighth house. Stay tuned for all the ways you can get in touch for a birth chart reading and full astrological services. I'm Joy. The ninth house is next.